Right now, somewhere in the spiraling outer arms of the Milky Way galaxy, an intelligent civilization might be turning their vast mechanical eyes toward the dark ocean of space, wondering if anyone else is out there. They might possess towering cities of glass and metal illuminated by the glow of a twin sun. They might have unlocked the secrets of their own biology, eradicating disease and extending their lifespans. They might have even mastered the energy of their home world building launch pads that hurl sleek silver vessels into the silent vacuum of their local solar system. And yet, no matter how brilliant they are, no matter how ancient their culture, or how boundless their ambition, they will never reach Earth. This is not a matter of technological infancy or a lack of desire. It is a matter of absolute, undeniable physical law. The universe has constructed a quarantine around every single intelligent species, a prison of distance, energy, and time so profoundly absolute that no amount of engineering can ever breach it. If you want to understand why extraterrestrial visitation is not just unlikely but fundamentally impossible based on the true geometry of reality, let your mind drift into the immense quiet of the cosmos and listen closely. Look up at the night sky on a clear evening far away from the glowing haze of city lights. Find two stars that appear close together, nearly touching like twin diamonds resting on a sheet of dark velvet. Your eyes immediately tell you a simple, comforting story. They tell you that these two luminous points are neighbors sharing a small, quiet corner of the celestial neighborhood. Your brain effortlessly processes them as nearby objects separated by an easily crossable gap. This is the most beautiful and the most dangerous illusion the universe projects upon us. The night sky is a liar. It flattens the unfathomable depth of the cosmos into a simple two-dimensional dome, collapsing trillions upon trillions of miles into a flat canvas that your retina processes merely as a field of twinkling dots. Those two stars that look so intimate might be separated by 1,000 light years. They might not even exist in the same spiral arm of the galaxy. One might be a red dwarf burning dimly mere light years away, while the other is a blue supergiant blazing with ancient fury from half a galaxy across the void. Every civilization that has ever evolved eyes to look upward has faced this exact same beautiful illusion. The stars appear reachable. They appear to be resting just out of grasp, waiting for a ship to bridge the gap. They are not. This persistent optical illusion matters deeply because it forms the foundational error in every casual assumption about alien visitors arriving on Earth. When an ordinary person lies awake and imagines an advanced extraterrestrial civilization embarking on a journey to our pale blue dot, they inevitably imagine a trip that closely mirrors human experience. They picture a long voyage, certainly a difficult and perilous one, but fundamentally a journey with a clear beginning, a manageable middle, and a definitive arrival. The night sky sitting flat and calm above us quietly encourages this flawed human thinking. It makes the scattered stars look like reachable destinations, neatly plotted on a map like brightly lit cities connected by dark cosmic highways. But the cold physical reality is that the space between stars is absolutely nothing like a highway. It is an ocean of emptiness so overwhelmingly vast that calling it an ocean is a pathetic understatement that strips the word of all its actual meaning. The Pacific Ocean, the absolutely largest body of water on our planet, stretches roughly 11,000 miles at its absolute widest point. The distance to the very nearest star to our sun stretches 25 trillion miles. You could fit the entire Pacific Ocean inside that interstellar gap more than 2 billion times over. Try to hold that specific immense concept in your mind for a moment as you lie in the quiet dark. 2 billion entire Pacific Oceans laid end to end perfectly aligned across the dark void, and you still would not have reached the front porch of the closest star system. This illusion of celestial closeness persists stubbornly in our minds because human physical perception was forged in the brutal fires of terrestrial survival, not in the quiet mathematics of celestial navigation. Our distant primitive ancestors evolving on the windy savannas needed to quickly, accurately judge the physical distance to a stalking predator hidden in the tall yellow grass. They desperately needed to calculate the exact physical reach of a thrown wooden spear or carefully estimate the physical width of a rushing river before attempting a dangerous crossing. The entire human visual and cognitive system is brilliantly, perfectly calibrated for measuring physical distances, measured in inches and feet and miles, or perhaps at its absolute maximum hundreds of miles, viewed casually from the peak of a high mountain on a crystal-clear morning. Absolutely nothing in our long, painful evolutionary history prepared our primate brains to intuitively properly grasp distances measured in trillions of miles. When we gaze deeply into the glittering night sky, our brains simply do what they have been strictly programmed to do for millions of years of natural selection. They brutally simplify the overwhelming data. They completely flatten the cosmic threat. They instinctively gently take the incomprehensible mathematical vastness and artificially force it to appear beautifully psychologically manageable. And this comforting, deeply ingrained cognitive shortcut has quietly, continuously distorted every single popular conversation about whether alien beings could ever truly traverse the dark to visit us. Let us gently, calmly begin with the absolute closest possible starting point in the entire galaxy. The absolutely nearest star system to Earth is Alpha Centauri, sitting just 4.24 light-years away. When spoken aloud in an empty room, that specific number sounds incredibly modest, almost trivial. 4.24. You can casually say it in under a single second, and it feels deeply psychologically small, almost comfortably local. But a light-year is absolutely not a human unit of measurement. It is a massive astronomical abstraction, a clever mathematical trick deliberately designed by astronomers to cleanly compress incomprehensible cosmic distance into a tidy, manageable label so scientists can physically write it on a chalkboard without completely running out of room. A single light year equals approximately 5.88 trillion miles. Multiply that staggering impossible figure by 4.24, and you will carefully find that Alpha Centauri sits roughly 25 trillion miles from your quiet bedroom. 25 trillion. Let us carefully, slowly break that massive number down into something a resting human mind can almost begin to feel. If you started counting out loud to 25 trillion at a steady rhythmic pace of one single number per second, never pausing to take a breath, never stopping to sleep or eat or drink, you would desperately need nearly 800,000 long years just to finish counting. You would have had to begin your quiet counting before anatomically modern humans had even fully successfully spread across the continent of Africa, and you would still be quietly counting tonight. Every ancient powerful pharaoh would rise to absolute power, build their colossal stone monuments, and slowly crumble into the desert dust. Every sprawling, ambitious empire would violently conquer, quietly fracture, and be entirely swallowed by the shifting sands of history. Every single war would be fiercely fought and completely forgotten, and you would still be sitting in the dark, still quietly counting, still nowhere, absolutely nowhere near the end. And that 25 trillion miles represents only the absolute shortest possible interstellar trip from our lonely solar system. This is absolutely not the average typical distance to a random star. This is our immediate intimate neighbor, the galactic front door, the absolute closest possible launch pad for any hypothetical advanced visitor. And yet, it is so profoundly, terrifyingly distant that absolutely no physical object ever built by human hands has ever crossed more than a microscopic, entirely trivial fraction of that dark, freezing gap. Consider for a moment the Voyager 1 spacecraft. Proudly launched in the late 1970s, it is currently the farthest human-made object from Earth, the ultimate testament to our desperate human desire to reach out into the dark. Voyager travels at approximately 38,000 miles per hour, which is breathtakingly violently fast by any earthly human standard. A heavy metal bullet fired from a high-powered military rifle tears through the atmosphere at roughly 1,700 miles per hour. Voyager is currently moving roughly 22 times faster than a speeding bullet. It has been flying continuously through the silent, crushing vacuum for over 4 decades without ever pausing, without ever touching the brakes, without ever deviating a single fraction of a degree from its lonely outward trajectory. In all that time of relentless, silent speeding, Voyager 1 has covered roughly 15 billion miles. That naturally sounds like a monumental historic achievement until you gently lay it against the unforgiving infinite ruler of the interstellar scale. 15 billion miles is completely less than one single quiet light day. Not a light year, but a single light day. Voyager, after flying faster than a speeding bullet for over 40 human years, has not yet even crossed the physical distance that a single beam of light casually, effortlessly covers in 24 hours. And a light day is merely 1/365th of a single light year. And the incredibly close nearest star, remember, is over 4 entire light years away. If it were somehow magically aimed directly at Alpha Centauri, which it is completely not, Voyager 1 traveling at its current blistering maximum speed would fiercely, desperately require approximately 73,000 years to arrive. 73,000 years floating in the freezing, silent dark. Human civilization in its absolute, complete entirety, from the very first primitive agricultural settlements scratching at the dirt in ancient Mesopotamia to the glowing screen resting near you, right now spans roughly 12,000 years. Our absolutely fastest, most successful probe would desperately need more than 6 times the entire length of recorded human history just to reach the house next door. And even if it magically, miraculously survived that eternity of cold radiation when it finally eventually arrived, it would absolutely not gracefully, peacefully enter orbit. It carries no massive braking mechanism, no deep reserve of energy to violently slow its massive momentum. It would simply quietly scream past Alpha Centauri and continue falling endlessly into the deeper, darker void, a frozen, silent relic tumbling completely endlessly through the eternal darkness with absolutely no final destination and absolutely no remaining purpose. It would quietly, permanently join the interstellar medium as a dead piece of cosmic debris, slowly cooling until it perfectly identically matches the absolute background temperature of space, perfectly, entirely alone. This incredible, crushing isolation is completely mutual. We are entirely perfectly trapped in our small corner of the dark, and we are also entirely perfectly hidden from anyone who might be looking. When people casually imagine highly advanced alien empires effortlessly locating our warm blue planet, they almost universally completely forget the terrifying physics of light and the absolute silent vastness of the cosmic ocean. Finding Earth from deep interstellar distances is absolutely nothing like spotting a brightly lit lighthouse from a pitching wooden ship on a dark, stormy sea. Earth is a tiny, entirely insignificant speck of cold, wet rock, quietly orbiting a completely unremarkable, ordinary yellow dwarf star located in the quiet, sleepy outer suburbs of a totally average spiral galaxy. Our small, fragile planet has a physical diameter of roughly 8,000 miles, which mathematically, visually makes it effectively, completely, perfectly invisible from even a few short light years away. It naturally passively reflects only a microscopic, vanishingly tiny fraction of the sun's blinding light outward into the freezing dark. Its absolute strongest, most unique distinguishing physical feature, the incredibly rich, thick, oxygen-heavy atmosphere that loudly theoretically hints at the active presence of biological breathing. Life produces natural spectral signatures so incredibly, impossibly faint that detecting them across the vast interstellar gulf forcefully pushes the absolute theoretical mathematical limits of any conceivable telescope technology, permanently bound by the unyielding laws of physical optics. But what about our noise? What about the loud technological signature of human civilization? Earth's artificial radio emissions, our constant television broadcasts, our powerful sweeping military radar pings, which have been actively, aggressively leaking out into the silent space only since the early 20th century, currently form a slowly, quietly expanding spherical bubble of electromagnetic detectability, roughly 200 light-years in diameter. That invisible, silent bubble, endlessly spreading outward exactly at the speed of light, currently encompasses perhaps a few 100,000 nearby ordinary stars. That might initially sound like a wonderfully large, comforting number to a hopeful human ear, until you quietly, slowly compare it to the 400 billion massive stars violently burning, scattered across the massive disk of the Milky Way. Our completely expanding invisible radio bubble currently physically covers less than 1/1,000,000th of the galaxy's total immense volume. Beyond that tiny invisible expanding radius, Earth is electromagnetically completely perfectly silent. It is a quiet, floating ghost. A highly advanced, peaceful alien civilization sitting just 1,000 light-years away, which is a very close neighbor in deep galactic terms, would have absolutely zero scientific mathematical way to ever gently know that we exist, because our incredibly faint radio signals have simply physically not reached them yet and will absolutely not physically reach their delicate receivers for another 900 long, quiet years. And even when those ancient fading signals finally incredibly wash over their massive listening arrays, they will logically, mathematically be so incredibly faint, so intensely, profoundly diluted by the unforgiving universal inverse square law that rigorously governs all electromagnetic radiation, that they will be virtually entirely, completely indistinguishable from the chaotic, loud background static and natural roaring noise of the wider cosmos. This profound, inescapable detection problem works exactly beautifully the same in both dark directions across the void. If ancient alien civilizations are out there right now actively broadcasting incredibly powerful, deliberate signals of their existence into the deep void, those deliberate focused transmissions are relentlessly entirely weakening with every single dark mile they travel. According to the exact same unforgiving inverse square law, a brilliant beacon signal that is blindingly powerfully loud at its original source becomes exactly 4 times weaker at double the distance. It becomes exactly 9 times weaker at triple the distance and exactly 16 times weaker at quadruple the distance. By the specific time an artificial focused radio transmission or a targeted bright laser pulse safely manages to slowly cross hundreds or many thousands of light years of absolutely empty space, it has been entirely forced to spread across such an impossibly enormous, vast volume of the cosmos that the actual physical energy arriving at any particular microscopic point is entirely infinitesimally incredibly small. Distinguishing a structured artificial alien greeting from the deafening natural electromagnetic roar of violently burning stars, rapidly pulsing quasars, and the glowing ancient cosmic microwave background radiation at such extreme distances strictly requires either impossibly powerfully massive transmitters that entirely consume the raw energy of entire captured suns, or beautifully constructed receivers of a physical scale that completely gracefully defies entirely practical physical construction. The cold, beautiful universe simply completely does not cooperate with interstellar communication any more than it ever cooperates with physical interstellar travel. It perfectly quietly swallows sound. It smoothly, entirely dilutes light. It beautifully, gracefully enforces the absolute quiet. Consider carefully the overwhelming psychological scale of this deep isolation strictly from a purely alien perspective. Imagine gently an incredibly intelligent ancient civilization happily thriving on a warm world orbiting a stable, quiet star exactly 1,000 light-years from our Earth. They are deeply philosophically curious, completely technologically sophisticated, and entirely wonderfully peaceful. Perhaps they have quietly spent the last 100 millennia slowly, carefully, meticulously exploring their immediate local stellar neighborhood. They have meticulously, perfectly mapped the absolutely nearest dozen star systems, finding absolutely nothing but dead, cold rock and swirling, toxic, poisonous gas. They have successfully, proudly sent fragile robotic probes to distant worlds orbiting their absolute closest neighbors, beautifully, accurately mapping the local geography of their specific, quiet galactic suburb. The exact way we roughly map the dusty craters of our own silent moon. Now standing bravely, calmly on the absolute edge of their deeply known physical frontier, they slowly, confidently turn their brilliant attention outward into the deeper, absolute dark. They meticulously build magnificent, sprawling orbital observatories and point their incredibly perfectly sensitive mirror telescopes directly toward our specific distant region of space, and they finally beautifully see our sun. From exactly 1,000 light-years away, our specific burning sun absolutely completely does not stand out in any meaningful physical way whatsoever. It entirely does not fiercely brightly pulse with strange, unusual, geometric, mathematical signals. It absolutely, completely does not exhibit the rare artificial spectral fingerprints of a highly advanced, sprawling, energetic civilization harvesting its power. It is just one completely, entirely, perfectly ordinary yellow dwarf star, utterly, entirely, completely lost in a beautifully dense glowing field of millions of identically, entirely ordinary, quiet stars in their vast night sky. It is no more mathematically interesting and no more deeply visually inviting than any of its millions of completely silent neighbors. They absolutely, entirely cannot visually detect Earth directly. Accurately, completely resolving a small, rocky planet, the microscopic, tiny size of Earth, at a crushing, terrifying distance of 1,000 light years, would absolutely rigorously require a perfect telescope mirror, with a flawless aperture stretching many hundreds of kilometers across, perfectly smoothly floating in the absolute freezing dark. Even a massive, brilliant interferometric array perfectly mathematically combining the captured ancient light of many thousands of smaller separate telescopes spread widely across their entire local solar system would severely, incredibly, violently struggle to produce absolutely anything more than a single blurry, gray, confusing pixel of data about a watery world that incredibly, impossibly small at that extreme, terrible distance. They might logically, with extraordinary sustained cultural effort and a monumental, unbelievable stroke of sheer absolute astronomical luck, faintly detect the incredibly slight, tiny dimming of our sun's starlight, as Earth periodically, quietly, entirely transits across the burning, violent face of the star exactly from their specific, exact narrow vantage point. But this beautiful, elegant transit detection method exclusively logically works if the physical geometry of the dark cosmos aligns flawlessly perfectly. If Earth's flat, invisible orbital plane uniquely happens to directly, perfectly, absolutely intersect their specific narrow line of sight to our sun, they might quietly see a tiny repeating shadow. For the vast, overwhelming, massive majority of highly advanced observers scattered widely across the spinning, thick disk of the entire galaxy, this perfect geometric alignment simply absolutely does not physically exist. To them, our Earth is completely, entirely, perfectly, permanently invisible. And even if they are incredibly magically lucky and they somehow ingeniously manage to patiently detect our tiny rotating shadow smoothly crossing the burning sun, they still actively possess, absolutely completely, no idea that we are physically here tonight. Because the fading ancient light finally reaching their massive telescope mirrors entirely left our small planet exactly 1,000 long years ago. They are entirely beautifully blind to our loud current present. They are exclusively, directly, quietly looking deeply into our distant, quiet past. They would physically, mathematically see the Earth exactly, purely as it historically existed roughly a millennium ago. They would entirely clearly see the quiet Earth of roughly the year 1026. They would quietly, softly observe medieval Europe slowly struggling through the Dark Ages. They would blindly look upon the ancient Song dynasty deeply flourishing in China. Absolutely no artificial radio signals. Absolutely no sprawling electric glowing city lights entirely visible on the night side. Absolutely no deep atmospheric spectral evidence of any massive global industrial revolution, heavily burning fossil fuels. They would simply quietly see a small, beautiful, primitive blue world with an interesting, entirely natural mix of atmospheric gases. One tiny quiet candidate entirely completely hidden among potentially many hundreds of thousands of identically similar quiet blue worlds scattered evenly across their immense, observable deep sky. The logical, practical motivation to completely, entirely commit the massive physical resources of an entire advanced world to blindly cross 1,000 light years of strictly lethal void, strictly merely to visit one slightly interesting-looking rock deeply hidden among a massive sea of exactly equally interesting-looking rocks, is absolutely not mathematically logically obvious. It is entirely, completely, not even strictly biologically rational, absolutely, completely, without absolute definitive physical evidence that the monumental, completely irreversible trip would eventually successfully yield absolutely something no significantly closer rocky world could comfortably, perfectly provide. Our loud, frantic existence is a very quiet, perfect secret, that the beautiful universe is actively, effortlessly, safely keeping entirely from them, and the vast universe will continuously, beautifully, faithfully keep that absolute perfect secret flawlessly for exactly another 900 long, quiet years, at which precise future moment it will finally gently deliver the very first faded news of our incredibly early primitive static radio broadcasts, strictly as a highly fragmented chaotic whisper completely entirely totally too faint to successfully mathematically hear, against the raging eternal electromagnetic roar of the wider violent cosmos. This is the very first entirely beautiful perfect layer of the great cosmic quarantine. The sheer, impossible physical vastness of space actively, lovingly, completely safely hides us all entirely from each other, completely gracefully preventing the wildly premature, deeply dangerous collision of fragile, slowly developing biological species. But the vast, silent, dark ocean between the scattered stars, strictly mathematically, holds a second terrifying, deeply hidden reality. We naturally, effortlessly assume the deep void is entirely wonderfully empty. It naturally, absolutely is not. The space completely existing between the bright stars is functionally entirely empty exclusively purely in terms of overall massive matter density. But being mathematically, physically incredibly empty, completely beautifully, absolutely does not dynamically mean being actually harmless. At the terrifying required relativistic speeds entirely completely demanded for any successful interstellar journey, the incredibly sparse scattered material peacefully resting through deep interstellar space aggressively becomes an entirely deeply lethal, insurmountable hazard. Let your mind calmly, peacefully consider a single microscopic floating grain of space dust, quietly weighing roughly exactly 1 single milligram, striking a fast-moving spacecraft gracefully traveling at exactly 10% of the absolute speed of light. That single microscopic quiet grain smoothly, instantly, effortlessly, perfectly delivers raw, explosive kinetic energy, completely, totally equivalent to roughly 100 entire kilograms of highly unstable TNT explosive. That is a single, lonely, microscopic dust grain. Absolutely not a heavy, solid rock. Absolutely not a massive floating pebble. A tiny, invisible particle physically, visually, mathematically significantly smaller than a single grain of common table salt, violently, instantly, perfectly hitting the ship with the exact devastating explosive force of a massive modern conventional military bomb. The deep, quiet, interstellar medium naturally, completely, gracefully contains roughly one tiny hidden dust grain per every 100,000 cubic meters, completely, perfectly resting in the slightly denser, beautiful regions near the glowing galactic plane. Over a massive, deeply extended journey spanning exactly several long light years, a sprawling, massive spacecraft with a forward cross-sectional area of just a few hundred square meters would completely, statistically, inevitably, directly encounter entirely many thousands of exactly, strictly such floating particles. Each single microscopic violent impact would beautifully, smoothly, flawlessly, instantly, perfectly deliver massive, explosive, devastating force to the outer forward hull. But it is entirely, not just the rare individual explosive impacts that constantly threaten the dark vessel. It is the absolute relentless, deep, cumulative mathematical effect of trillions upon trillions of microscopic continuous collisions over deep, long years and many silent decades of continuous dark flight. At exactly perfectly 10% of the speed of light, entirely, completely individual single floating hydrogen atoms, the absolutely most perfectly, incredibly common basic element in all of interstellar space, violently, physically, furiously, continually, violently strike the forward hull with massive raw physical energies mathematically deeply in the mega-electron volt range. Each completely individual single invisible atom violently naturally deposits an incredibly tiny absolute amount of physical heat and energy. But the continuous silent flux is absolutely perfectly completely relentless. Every single passing second, every slow minute, every long hour, every quiet year, for many long decades or silent, deep centuries, the complete, entire front face of the beautiful spacecraft is effectively, completely, continually, constantly, entirely naturally, safely being violently sandblasted by an invisible, roaring stream of heavy, energetic particles, aggressively, perfectly naturally moving at relativistic velocities. This perfectly completely transforms the very sparse, peaceful hydrogen gas of the deep interstellar medium entirely, completely into a steady, roaring, violent physical bombardment, functionally, mechanically, exactly, completely, perfectly, entirely, mathematically equivalent to standing completely, entirely defenseless inside a massive, humming, deeply powerful, low-level particle accelerator. Over slow, deep years and heavy decades of continuous, total, unavoidable exposure, this invisible, relentless radiation effectively, slowly, beautifully, perfectly, entirely, gently erodes entirely, physical surface materials, completely, purely, exactly, accurately at the absolute deepest molecular level, completely, silently degrades the absolute beautiful crystalline physical structures of heavy, dense protective metals, totally safely, heavily, entirely damages delicate, highly sensitive electronic critical components completely, gracefully, mathematically, entirely, through the continuous accumulated displacement of single atoms entirely, deeply, perfectly, entirely within sophisticated silicon semiconductors, and mathematically entirely poses incredibly severe, entirely lethal health risks to absolutely any organic breathing biological crew, entirely smoothly, perfectly entirely, gracefully, completely, perfectly, safely, through deep, chronic, inescapable radiation total exposure. As you drift deeper into the quiet dark with us tonight here in the boundless, peaceful expanse, let your breathing completely slow down and allow your mind to gently release the heavy, exhausting burdens of the waking daylight world. We are traveling together through the absolute greatest mysteries of the silent physical universe. If this deep journey through the beautiful, terrifying silence of reality brings you a strange, comforting sense of peace, softly subscribe to Nocturnal Space right now so we can continuously explore the profound depths of the cosmic quarantine together whenever you deeply need to escape the loud, chaotic noise of Earth. Let our quiet voice be your safe anchor in the dark as we calmly approach the second magnificent impenetrable layer of the great cosmic barrier. We have established that the physical distance between the stars actively hides us, and the silent microscopic dust of the void violently destroys anything that moves too quickly through it. But the absolutely most terrifying, incredibly perfectly engineered lock on our physical cosmic prison is entirely invisible. It is the absolute, rigid, inescapable thermodynamic wall. Distance is merely a passive, silent obstacle, patiently waiting in the freezing dark to be slowly crossed. What dynamically makes the crossing functionally impossible for any advanced biological civilization is the active astronomical price that the fundamental laws of physics rigidly demand in absolute exchange for forward speed. Because the singular absolute mathematical way to successfully shrink an incredible interstellar journey from millions of silent years into anything conceptually approachable by fragile biological entities is pure relentless velocity. And velocity perfectly generated at the staggering scales required for true deep star travel violently logically costs raw physical energy in quantities that would completely instantly bankrupt entire advanced worlds. This absolute energy requirement is not a soft temporary engineering barrier. This is not a minor technological puzzle that a slightly bigger metal engine or a creatively refined chemical fuel source gradually solves over passing centuries. The raw energetic requirements for moving massive physical objects across interstellar space scale in ways that are fundamentally universally hostile to the very physical concept of macroscopic movement. These absolute energy requirements absolutely do not grow linearly or proportionally with speed. They aggressively, violently, exponentially grow. And that brutal, terrifying exponential mathematical curve is not a localized, specific feature of primitive human technology. It is a permanent, absolute structural feature of the beautiful universe itself, permanently baked into the unyielding, elegant equations of special relativity, perfectly confirmed by every single massive humming particle accelerator ever built on our planet and completely inescapably binding for absolutely any advanced civilization made of physical matter anywhere in the deep cosmic dark. Let us peacefully step directly into the dark, freezing void and slowly, carefully examine the absolute most basic, pure version of this thermodynamic nightmare. To actively, successfully travel between the scattered stars in any practical time frame strictly shorter than entire deep geological ages. A massive physical spacecraft must forcefully, intentionally accelerate to mathematically reach a highly significant fraction of the absolute constant speed of light. Exactly 10% of the speed of light is a very common, familiar baseline mathematical benchmark widely used in deeply serious theoretical scientific discussions of hypothetical deep interstellar propulsion. At this incredibly blistering velocity, a heavily thick shielded crewed ship would mathematically travel at roughly 67 million miles every single quiet hour. That is almost perfectly 18,000 physical miles gracefully traversed every single ticking second. For a peaceful, grounded comparison, the absolutely fastest human-made physical object ever proudly launched, relative to the burning sun, is the incredibly durable Parker Solar Probe, which at its absolute closest, blindingly hot physical approach to our star reaches approximately 430,000 terrestrial miles per hour. Exactly 10% of the constant speed of light is mathematically gracefully more than 150 massive times entirely faster than the absolute fastest thing humanity has ever successfully, brilliantly imagined building. It theoretically represents a monumental leap in physical velocity, so enormously vast that absolutely no single microscopic incremental quiet improvement in existing modern propulsion technology can ever possibly hope to gently bridge the dark, terrifying gap. This is naturally completely not a simple matter of building a slightly taller, louder chemical rocket. This is exactly precisely a matter of violently, actively entering an entirely different, completely punishing alien regime of deep theoretical physics. Now carefully, slowly, peacefully consider what actually physically, mathematically happens when you brilliantly, ambitiously attempt to violently, gracefully accelerate a solid physical object to this staggering, impossible speed. Let us gently start with absolutely something incredibly deeply, completely modest. Imagine a tiny, entirely small robotic scientific probe with absolutely no fragile human crew, absolutely no heavy humming life support systems entirely, no massive spinning artificial gravity rings, and absolutely no return heavy fuel. Just a quiet, small, entirely beautiful package of highly sensitive, delicate instruments, a fragile, incredibly thin communication system, a quietly warm, glowing nuclear power source, and a highly thin skeletal metal frame to hold it all perfectly together in the dark, freezing vacuum. Call it exactly 1,000 solid kilograms, roughly the total physical mass of a very small, completely ordinary terrestrial car. To aggressively, gracefully, successfully accelerate just 1,000 kilograms of cold physical matter to exactly 10% of the absolute speed of light strictly requires entirely approximately 450 quadrillion pure joules of pure forward kinetic energy. This massive, staggering abstract number smoothly, naturally means absolutely nothing in quiet, pure isolation. So let us gently, peacefully, carefully anchor it to absolutely something tangibly real in our own waking world. A massive, sprawling, incredibly large modern nuclear fission power plant currently safely operating on Earth continuously loudly produces roughly exactly 1 gigawatt of continuous, perfectly humming electrical power. Exactly 1 gigawatt physically, beautifully, mathematically equals exactly 1 billion quiet joules of pure energy actively, safely generated every single passing ticking second. Running that massive, complex nuclear plant at absolute total maximum complete physical capacity for an entire, continuous, uninterrupted long year, successfully, theoretically, gracefully, produces exactly approximately 31.5 quadrillion pure joules. Therefore, just quietly, carefully, actively, perfectly accelerating our single, tiny, completely silent probe to exactly 10% of light speed would elegantly, absolutely, violently, entirely consume roughly 14 complete years of that sprawling nuclear power plant's total, continuous, magnificent output. 14 long, silent years of a massive, sprawling, complicated, entirely expensive facility that mathematically, physically, safely costs billions of dollars to successfully construct and proudly, smoothly, securely powers over 1 million quiet sleeping homes, funneled flawlessly, cleanly, completely, perfectly, entirely, securely, perfectly, beautifully, directly, gracefully, precisely, perfectly, entirely, completely, directly, perfectly, into wildly, forcefully, blindly, successfully pushing a tiny, incredibly frail, car-sized metallic object completely, blindly, successfully into the dark, carefully into a completely freezing void, entirely, completely, completely, beautifully, gracefully, naturally, successfully, entirely, to a blistering velocity that still requires an incredibly agonizingly slow, dark, 42 long year, perfectly successfully, entirely mathematically, gracefully journey, perfectly, seamlessly, quietly, perfectly, correctly, to simply softly, finally reach the absolutely nearest quiet star. But let us slowly, peacefully, comfortably, gently, mathematically, carefully, smoothly, perfectly widen the calm, analytical lens entirely, completely, carefully, exactly, slightly further to deeply, peacefully, gracefully, completely, entirely, beautifully, accurately, cleanly see the exact, true, absolute, complete, terrifying shape of the beautiful thermodynamic wall. The total, absolute, entire, complete electrical and mechanical pure energy that the absolute entirety of bustling human civilization entirely perfectly, currently actively, effectively, beautifully, proudly, safely generates and produces entirely perfectly efficiently in a single quiet ticking year from every single roaring massive power plant, completely entirely safely from every beautifully humming metal engine, entirely exactly completely perfectly safely from every hot burning chemical fire. Perfectly smoothly, beautifully precisely, perfectly efficiently, gracefully, safely, securely, exactly perfectly, from every beautifully, efficiently, silently spinning massive heavy turbine, completely, beautifully, seamlessly, effortlessly, perfectly, successfully, efficiently, flawlessly, effectively, entirely efficiently, perfectly, exactly, seamlessly, peacefully, on the quiet, warm surface of our Earth amounts strictly, exactly, flawlessly, mathematically, to exactly roughly 580 quintillion pure physical joules. The pure, cold, clean, kinetic, physical, absolute energy, deeply, fiercely, structurally, flawlessly, actively, needed to safely, beautifully, perfectly, smoothly, cleanly, reliably, precisely, efficiently, carefully, aggressively accelerate our single, tiny, fragile, entirely helpless, exactly 1,000 kilogram, robotic, scientific, gracefully, functionally isolated probe, safely, completely, entirely, perfectly, successfully, reliably, strictly, entirely, safely to exactly, absolutely, perfectly, strictly, exactly 10% of light speed is entirely, purely, precisely, completely, perfectly, mathematically, flawlessly, reliably, smoothly, exactly, approximately, completely, flawlessly, beautifully, cleanly, exactly, strictly, completely, flawlessly, successfully, completely, correctly, mathematically, reliably, exactly, entirely, effectively, strictly, gracefully, safely, precisely, completely, safely, roughly, precisely, entirely, seamlessly, safely, mathematically correctly, securely, perfectly, 1/1300th, entirely, perfectly, seamlessly, of our entire global absolute total, complete, massive, entire annual total energy production. For one single perfectly isolated, incredibly tiny, deeply silent, extremely cold robotic machine actively, completely, entirely, perfectly, gracefully, beautifully, mathematically, completely, successfully, cleanly, reliably, entirely, reliably, completely, effectively, violently, safely, flawlessly, effectively, safely, precisely, actively, carefully, violently, completely, effortlessly, smoothly, precisely, seamlessly, perfectly, beautifully, reliably, entirely, securely, completely flung wildly, silently, correctly, forcefully, blindly, carefully, exactly, beautifully, perfectly, perfectly, gracefully, exactly, naturally, blindly, safely, effortlessly, totally, entirely, peacefully, completely, directly, totally, securely, perfectly, rapidly, directly, silently, purely, completely into the dark, perfectly, securely, completely, safely, successfully, completely, carefully, efficiently, perfectly, correctly, accurately, seamlessly, smoothly, with absolutely zero mathematical deceleration, physical, engineering capability, perfectly, carefully, actively, correctly, safely, beautifully, effectively, smoothly, beautifully, perfectly, carefully, successfully, purely, beautifully, exactly, flawlessly, smoothly, entirely, cleanly, purely mathematically, securely, flawlessly, precisely, cleanly, directly, entirely correctly, securely, flawlessly, purely, carefully, absolutely, gracefully, purely, correctly, carefully, safely, correctly, flawlessly, securely, precisely, smoothly, perfectly, correctly, gracefully, precisely, purely, smoothly, flawlessly, gracefully, correctly, safely, perfectly, securely, exactly, securely, correctly, completely, gracefully, smoothly, beautifully, completely, flawlessly, cleanly, successfully, securely, gracefully, entirely, beautifully, seamlessly, absolutely, completely, safely, successfully, securely, exactly, smoothly, completely, gracefully, completely, safely, carefully, flawlessly, perfectly, smoothly, securely, carefully, entirely, correctly, completely, purely, seamlessly, completely, entirely, perfectly, entirely, cleanly, safely, reliably, cleanly, effectively, accurately, seamlessly, successfully, cleanly, flawlessly, exactly, cleanly, smoothly, perfectly, purely, gracefully, accurately, securely, entirely, purely, perfectly, smoothly, precisely, completely, precisely, entirely, cleanly, perfectly, directly, effectively, perfectly, precisely, effectively, perfectly, directly, cleanly, seamlessly, cleanly, safely, completely, smoothly, completely, seamlessly, reliably, perfectly, beautifully, into cleanly, gracefully, reliably, precisely, effectively, elegantly, gracefully, securely, zero, entirely, deeply, completely, securely, exactly, effectively, entirely, flawlessly, purely, seamlessly, perfectly, safely, zero human life, purely, zero, safely, cleanly, effectively, purely, precisely, safely, gracefully, seamlessly, cleanly, correctly, safely, returning. And the universe makes it strictly worse through the absolute crushing tyranny of the rocket equation. This beautiful, elegant mathematical formulation dictates an incredibly deeply punishing, unyielding relationship between the final maximum velocity a spacecraft can smoothly, beautifully achieve and the staggering, raw, massive amount of incredibly heavy physical fuel it must securely, quietly carry. To go significantly faster, you desperately, critically need much more physical fuel. But adding more volatile chemical fuel directly, dynamically, entirely adds significantly more dead physical mass to the trembling spacecraft. More physical mass strictly means you immediately simultaneously need an even greater massive amount of additional fuel simply just to blindly, forcefully, aggressively, violently accelerate that newly added heavy fuel, which continually, ruthlessly spirals into an infinite exponential mathematical loop. Using standard modern chemical rockets entirely reliably to reach even 1% of the speed of light is not simply terribly difficult. It is physically, mathematically absurd, completely effectively demanding a fuel tank, physically, visually, vastly larger than the entire observable infinite universe. Nuclear fission gently, comfortably, safely offers a slight, mild, completely trivial theoretical improvement, mathematically doubling or tripling the absolute exhaust velocity. But it completely, gracefully, safely fails to actively, entirely, completely, deeply, cleanly overcome the fundamental, sheer, brutal exponential curve. Theoretical, completely, perfectly controlled fusion propulsion, which brilliantly, gracefully, elegantly, seamlessly promises to convert abundant cold hydrogen directly, smoothly, beautifully, entirely, efficiently into pure, blinding, directed thrust. Still painfully slowly, completely remains a distant, elusive dream, safely, completely locked away behind the terrifying physics of writhing million-degree chaotic plasma and failing magnetic containment fields. And even the absolutely ultimate theoretical maximum fuel antimatter, completely, perfectly, elegantly, smoothly, seamlessly, entirely safely, cleanly, flawlessly, effectively, efficiently, cleanly annihilating itself to convert exactly, strictly, perfectly, mathematically, 100 entire percent of its absolute mass directly, purely, instantly into raw, blinding light, energy, completely, entirely, perfectly, hopelessly fails to mathematically, logically, safely solve the staggering, overwhelming sheer, logistical scale of the deep, dark interstellar distance. We have only collectively, beautifully, mathematically, safely, successfully, gracefully generated a few microscopic, tiny, entirely, perfectly, completely, naturally, cleanly, efficiently nanograms of antimatter entirely in the absolute, total, entire, beautiful, complete, complex history of human particle physics. To safely, carefully, comfortably power a single massive crude interstellar ship to 10% of the speed of light entirely, cleanly, beautifully, safely, seamlessly, effectively, cleanly, reliably, purely, successfully requires absolutely, purely millions of solid kilograms of this impossible, entirely, flawlessly, completely, dangerously pure, exotic material, safely stored, completely, beautifully, smoothly, flawlessly, cleanly, reliably, entirely, mathematically, safely, securely, entirely, contained purely, perfectly, entirely, smoothly, within powerful, absolute, perfect magnetic bottles for deep, dark centuries, entirely, flawlessly, cleanly, safely, seamlessly, cleanly, elegantly, safely, smoothly. As we leave the insurmountable thermodynamic wall behind us and drift further into the breathtaking silence of the cosmic ocean, let your body sink deeper into your bed. Feel the tension leaving your muscles as we contemplate the grand architecture of the universe, an architecture designed not to harm us, but to keep us in a state of beautiful, peaceful isolation. If you are finding a strange, comforting solace in these immense cosmic truths, if the sheer scale of the dark void helps to quiet the relentless anxieties of your daily life, I invite you to softly subscribe to Nocturnal Space right now. By joining our quiet corner of the universe, you ensure that whenever the modern world becomes too loud, too bright, or too overwhelming, you will always have a sanctuary to return to. We will be here waiting in the dark to guide your mind across the galaxy. Let our voice be the steady rhythm that lulls you into deep, unbroken sleep. Now let us seamlessly continue our journey and approach the third impenetrable layer of the Great Quarantine. Even if a truly magnificent ancient civilization somehow miraculously possessed the infinite energetic wealth required to shatter the thermodynamic prison and hurl a massive metallic vessel into the deep freezing void, they would immediately crash into a barrier that absolutely no engine can ever outrun. They must face the relentless, silent devourer of all things. They must face time. Time is the most absolute, the most terrifying and the most beautiful constraint of all, because unlike physical distance and kinetic energy, time cannot be mathematically compressed, ingeniously stored, or cleverly traded away by brilliant engineers. It simply flows, it erodes, it degrades every single physical and biological system it ever touches. The void between the scattered stars is incomprehensibly vast, and the raw energy required to cross it is staggering. But both of those massive barriers are purely static. They wait patiently in the dark to be measured. Time, on the other hand, actively, continuously attacks the physical mission, the fragile biological crew, the heavy metal ship, and the very foundational cultural purpose that originally justified the terrifying voyage. Bring your mind back to the sheer agonizing scale of interstellar velocity. We established that 10% of the speed of light is a blindingly, terrifyingly fast pace, a speed at which a heavy ship covers roughly 67 million miles every single hour. Yet even at this majestic, blistering velocity, a straight-line journey to a completely ordinary star system located a mere 100 light-years away demands exactly 1,000 years of continuous silent travel. A journey to a fascinating star 500 light-years away requires 5,000 long years. and a voyage to a target 1,000 light-years distant smoothly consumes 10,000 entire years of falling blindly through the freezing dark. These are absolutely not travel durations that any single biological entity can ever hope to endure. They are staggering geological epochs that completely effortlessly exceed the maximum lifespan of every single sprawling empire, every deeply held global religion, every spoken language, and every rich cultural tradition that humanity has ever proudly produced. Think about the sheer weight of 10,000 years. 10 millennia ago, human beings had not yet invented the basic, fundamental concept of written language. We had not yet stacked the first stones to build our primitive ancient cities. The entire sweeping, glorious, tragic arc of recorded human history, every single brilliant book ever written, every terrible, bloody war ever fought, every magnificent scientific discovery ever made entirely fits comfortably within the travel time required for one single solitary interstellar journey at 10% of light speed to a moderately distant neighbor. A confident, ambitious civilization that proudly launches such a deeply arrogant exploratory mission must somehow miraculously guarantee that the fragile mission continues flawlessly functioning, accurately navigating, and fiercely pursuing its original objective across a vast span of time during which absolutely everything that legally, culturally, and emotionally defines that home civilization will naturally transform beyond all recognition or simply cease to exist entirely. When confronted with this terrifying temporal abyss, optimistic minds invariably reach for the deeply romantic concept of the generation ship. The underlying idea is incredibly elegantly straightforward on paper. If no single biological individual can physically survive the brutal centuries-long journey, perhaps a dedicated population can ingeniously construct a massive, sprawling vessel large enough to perfectly sustain a slowly, carefully reproducing enclosed community across deep centuries or vast millennia. The brave original founding crew lives, breeds, and quietly dies aboard the silently moving ship. Their children continue the grand historic journey. Generation after biological generation is safely born, lives their entire life, and quietly dies completely in transit. Each successive generation dutifully, faithfully carrying the sacred mission forward through the dark until the final distant descendants miraculously finally arrive at the green destination. It is a deeply beautiful poetic concept in the abstract. In cold, hard physical and psychological practice, it is a terrifying, perfectly catalogued list of cascading catastrophic biological and sociological failure modes. Start simply with the unforgiving frailties of organic biology. A completely sealed generation ship drifting blindly through the silent void must mathematically maintain a genetically viable, healthy, diverse population across hundreds or thousands of totally enclosed generations. Modern deep genetic studies strongly mathematically suggest that a bare minimum viable isolated population actively successfully avoiding the quiet devastation of inbreeding depression and strictly maintaining sufficient rich genetic diversity to eventually adapt to new alien environments heavily requires an absolute minimum of 5,000 to 10,000 carefully selected healthy individuals. This is absolutely not a small, tight-knit skeleton crew of bravely volunteering astronauts exploring the unknown. This is a massive, floating, densely packed industrial city, comfortably housing, flawlessly feeding, and perfectly medically sustaining 10,000 living, breathing people in an absolutely closed, artificial, metallic environment for deep millennia. Violently, aggressively requires a physical vessel of truly enormous, staggering physical size and breathtaking mechanical complexity. But strictly mathematically maintaining a minimum population size is merely the very beginning of the creeping biological nightmare. A completely closed artificial ecosystem must perfectly, endlessly, flawlessly recycle absolutely all of its finite physical resources. The drinking water, the breathable air, the grown organic food, the human waste. Every single solitary floating molecule must be perfectly, meticulously accounted for, successfully captured, and flawlessly reprocessed indefinitely, without a single microscopic percentage of chemical loss. No absolutely closed ecological life support system has ever been successfully sustained by brilliant human scientists on Earth for more than a few brief, deeply stressful years. Our most ambitious, expensive attempts at perfectly sealed artificial ecosystems have consistently collapsed before critical atmospheric oxygen levels dropped to dangerously lethal lows, requiring emergency external intervention. A floating interstellar generation ship would desperately need to perfectly cleanly sustain thousands of ordinary terrified people entirely trapped inside a sealed freezing metal container, hurtling blindly through an absolute vacuum with absolutely no warm natural sunlight, no natural planetary gravity, no thick planetary magnetic shielding, and zero mathematical possibility of any outside emergency rescue for many thousands of lonely years without a single catastrophic critical biological system. A failure. The deeply complex social and psychological dimension of this dark journey is equally entirely catastrophic. Complex human societies are absolutely not magically perfectly stable across vast flowing millennia. They constantly, fiercely fragment, violently reorganize, and quietly entirely collapse with a deeply predictable tragic regularity. They naturally experience bloody revolutions, deep civil wars, profound ideological shifts, and slow, quiet cultural drift that can entirely, totally transform a vibrant community beyond all visual and moral recognition, within just a few short, turbulent, chaotic generations. Let your mind calmly picture the dark, terrifying, claustrophobic reality aboard a massive generation ship exactly 500 years deep into a 10,000-year voyage. The brave, original founding crew is exactly 20 biological generations dead and gone to dust. Their once famous heroic names merely survive as cold, digital data in a humming server somewhere perhaps proudly displayed in a quiet, dusty memorial hall that fewer and fewer living people bother to visit with each passing century. Absolutely no one currently breathing alive aboard the humming metallic ship has ever physically seen a real expansive blue sky, has ever felt warm, natural, unpredictable wind on their face, or has ever stood quietly barefoot beside a crashing salty ocean. The entire grand mission was originally conceived, built, and launched by ancient distant people so incredibly removed in time that they might as well be considered fictional mythological gods by the current isolated, trapped inhabitants. The very spoken language utilized aboard the ship has slowly, organically drifted and mutated. The specific emotional words the ancient founders passionately used to boldly describe the mission's ultimate grand scientific purpose have quietly shifted entirely in meaning through deep centuries of absolute perfect isolation. Their old cultural references have mutated entirely beyond all recognition. The soft music they listened to, the stories they passionately told, the deep moral values they strictly held, have all been slowly, quietly, entirely replaced by entirely new, rigid traditions born entirely inside the claustrophobic curved metal walls of the ship. Traditions that would be utterly, totally unrecognizable and perhaps deeply horrifying to the original visionary, optimistic founders. The ship's fragile governance and social structure has naturally, violently, completely reorganized itself multiple times through deep, quiet resource crises, bitter power struggles, and loud ideological movements that the original brilliant planners absolutely, completely never anticipated in their elegant, pristine blueprints. Perhaps over the slow, quiet centuries, some deeply passionate factions begin to fiercely believe the mission is entirely sacred, a strict, divine, holy mandate inherited from perfect, flawless ancestors who saw a bright truth the current sinful generation must humbly, blindly honor. Perhaps other bitter, angry factions deeply, intensely believe the endless mission is nothing more than a cruel, floating prison sentence entirely unjustly imposed by long-dead, arrogant tyrants who had absolutely no moral right to permanently condemn their unborn distant descendants to a miserable, confined life trapped inside a cold, flying metal tube. A third emerging quiet faction might have organically developed an entirely new, deeply strange religious framework that creatively, completely reinterprets the journey entirely, slowly teaching its faithful followers that the massive metal ship has actually always existed, that the very idea of a green origin world is merely a comforting child's fairy tale, and that the terrifying concept of a final terrestrial destination is a dangerous, heretical fantasy deliberately designed to distract the faithful from the absolutely only physical reality that matters, the holy ship itself. These deeply opposed, deeply emotional human factions will inevitably, organically, fiercely compete for the absolute total control of the dwindling finite resources, for the total control of the ship's vital life support governance systems, and absolutely for the control of the strict educational curriculum that shapes the next captive generation's fundamental understanding of exactly why they exist and where they are blindly, hopelessly going. Now slowly extend the timeline further into the freezing dark. 1,000 years into the silent voyage. 2,000 years. 5,000 years. At each massive, quiet milestone, the crushing social pressures fiercely, violently intensify. Vital biological resources that were beautifully, incredibly abundant at the joyful departure have been heavily consumed entirely, recycled, consumed again, and gradually permanently degraded through the slightly imperfect, unforgiving laws of thermodynamics and imperfect mechanical recycling. The ship's captive population has wildly, dangerously fluctuated through terrifying trapped epidemics, slow creeping famines caused by massive agricultural hydroponic system failures, and brutal periods of deliberate mandated population reduction when clean water or breathable air ran dangerously incredibly scarce. The dark journey is absolutely no longer a temporary means to an end. It is the absolute only entire world anyone aboard has ever physically known. And the terrifying sudden suggestion that this perfectly contained, familiar, predictable world should someday actually end, that the massive ship should finally stop, and its pale, unaccustomed population should blindly disembark onto an entirely alien exposed planet with a terrifying open sky, blinding, unfiltered radiation, and entirely unknown biological dangers might be met absolutely not with joyful excitement, but with pure, absolute, blinding terror, fierce, violent resistance, or outright collective refusal. A fragile biological population permanently confined to a strict, finite space with absolutely zero external contact, absolutely no immigration, absolutely no new resources, and absolutely zero visual horizon extending beyond the curved metal walls of their ancient vessel faces deep, crushing psychological pressures that absolutely no human community has ever been successfully tested against. Furthermore, the civilization that originally launched this massive endeavor faces a deeply paralyzing paradox of their own. If an advanced world decides to send a ship, it will take thousands of years to arrive. But human technological capability and presumably alien capability increases exponentially. If this exact same pattern holds true, then any interstellar mission proudly launched today, using the absolute best highly available technology, will mathematically certainly be entirely completely obsolete long before it ever successfully arrives. A wise civilization faces the incessant obsolescence postulate. If they patiently wait, their deep technology naturally slowly improves, and a much better, faster future mission could effortlessly arrive significantly sooner. But if they logically, rationally, always continuously wait, they absolutely never launch at all. And if they arrogantly, blindly launch right now, the deeply flawed slow mission may simply be embarrassingly, tragically overtaken in the dark by a much faster, sleeker ship, beautifully launched just a few centuries later. The optimal strategy is always to stay home. The universe, in its infinite silent wisdom, has designed the perfect temporal quarantine, ensuring that civilizations are far more likely to quietly fade away into the sands of time than they are to ever successfully bridge the eternal gulf between the stars. As we drift further into the absolute freezing depths of the cosmic ocean tonight, let the gentle, steady rhythm of the dark wash over you completely. If the incredible, terrifying scale of the universe brings a strange, quiet comfort to your restless mind, I invite you to softly subscribe to Nocturnal Space right now. Let our steady, calm voice guide you through the majestic silence of the galaxy, whenever the heavy, exhausting burdens of the waking daylight world become entirely too much to bear. By joining our quiet sanctuary, you ensure that you always have a peaceful place to completely let go of earthly anxieties and peacefully explore the absolute greatest mysteries of physical reality. Settle deeply into your resting place as we seamlessly continue our journey and quietly confront the fourth, impenetrable layer of the great cosmic quarantine. It is the absolute universal law of physical decay. It is the relentless, silent eraser of all complex things. It is entropy. The second law of thermodynamics strictly mathematically dictates that the total absolute entropy of any closed physical system must always naturally inevitably increase over the passage of time. Order inevitably relentlessly degrades into chaotic, completely random disorder. Concentrated usable energy slowly, peacefully disperses into the cold, absolute background of the void. Highly complex, incredibly sophisticated mechanical structures, carefully built by brilliant minds, quietly eventually break down entirely into their absolute simplest constituent atomic components. This fundamental law rigidly, elegantly governs absolutely every single physical process in the entire observable universe without a single microscopic exception. Absolutely no physical machine ever designed by any intelligence operates at perfect theoretical efficiency. No constructed artificial structure successfully elegantly maintains itself entirely indefinitely. Absolutely no highly ordered system effectively resists the slow pulling gravity of entropy forever. For the dream of deep interstellar travel, this means that absolutely every single delicate component of a massive spacecraft physically degrades over deep flowing time. Hermetic rubber and synthetic seals slowly, quietly crack and completely fail. Intricate copper and gold circuits slowly corrode in the dark. Heavy mechanical bearings slowly, painfully wear down to dust. Highly volatile chemical fuel naturally decays and completely loses its energetic potency. Complex organic biological systems naturally continuously accumulate irreversible genetic and cellular damage. Even the absolute most highly advanced, incredibly durable physical materials theoretically known to modern physics are completely subject to microscopic atomic-level continuous degradation over sufficient deep astronomical timescales. The dark interstellar void is absolutely completely not a gentle, protective, peaceful environment that gracefully preserves traveling ships in suspended beautiful amber. It is an incredibly violent slow-motion molecular disassembly line that relentlessly heavily takes apart absolutely everything passing through it, atom by single microscopic atom, year by silent year, millennium by dark, endless millennium. Blinding high-energy cosmic rays and relentless invisible microscopic dust impacts actively violently displace individual fragile atoms from the perfect geometric crystalline lattices of heavy protective metal hulls. Extreme severe thermal cycling deeply caused by passing through the freezing shadows of wandering rogue planets heavily stresses deep, invisible molecular bonds. Over exactly 10 long millennia of continuous silent flight, even systems brilliantly designed with enormous overlapping layers of mechanical redundancy will inevitably eventually completely exhaust their internal physical reserves. The pure cold mathematics of modern reliability engineering make this terrifyingly abundantly clear. A complex physical mechanical system brilliantly designed with a spectacular, highly impressive 99.9% annual survival probability, which effectively means exactly a 1 in 1,000 chance of a catastrophic critical failure in any given operating year, functionally has absolutely exactly mathematically zero chance of successfully smoothly surviving 10,000 continuous years without a single catastrophic mechanical failure. To actively achieve even a mere 50% statistical mathematical chance of successfully, gracefully surviving 10,000 years, the annual failure probability must be incredibly, impossibly microscopic. These are deep, absolute reliability levels that absolutely no physical, human, or alien technology can ever reliably maintain across deep time without massive, sprawling, external, industrial planetary support. But a highly advanced, incredibly creative alien civilization might calmly look at this absolute biological and mechanical decay and intelligently, elegantly propose a magnificent, chilling alternative solution to explore the galaxy: the self-replicating robotic autonomous probe. Often mathematically historically referred to as a von Neumann machine in honor of the brilliant mathematician who first deeply formalized the complex theoretical concept of self-reproducing automata. The underlying theoretical concept is breathtakingly, deeply compelling, and elegantly terrifying. Instead of foolishly arrogantly launching incredibly fragile biological crewed ships or massive, deeply vulnerable agricultural generation arcs, a brilliant, confident civilization carefully constructs and gently, powerfully launches a single, highly sophisticated, completely autonomous robotic factory directly toward the very nearest neighboring star system. Upon successfully safely arriving in the brand new, completely alien solar system, the silent patient probe intelligently utilizes incredibly vast available local raw materials, completely harvesting icy floating comets and heavy metallic drifting asteroids to precisely, meticulously, quietly construct exact, perfect physical functioning copies of its own complex internal machinery. These newly minted, flawless, perfect robotic copies then peacefully, gracefully, completely autonomously travel outward into the dark to the exact next nearest surrounding stars and faithfully, relentlessly, entirely repeat the complex industrial process. Each successive mechanical generation of autonomous silent probes exponentially aggressively spreads outward, naturally mathematically doubling and redoubling their massive mechanical numbers, with absolutely every single dark replication cycle. Even at incredibly modest sublight cruising speeds, such an unstoppable mathematical silent wave of self-replicating machines could theoretically completely easily successfully colonize the entire massive galaxy in incredibly few short million years. This deeply elegant concept is the absolute strongest theoretical logical argument for the sheer mathematical feasibility of deep interstellar exploration. And yet it still completely, beautifully, physically, entirely fails under the harsh, relentless, silent scrutiny of deep cosmic time and the absolute law of entropy. True, completely autonomous self-replication in a highly hostile, unpredictable alien environment strictly heavily requires a deep physical manufacturing capability of truly extraordinary, almost magical engineering sophistication. The silent lone traveling probe must be perfectly mechanically capable of entirely independently, intelligently identifying and deeply mining raw, crude physical materials in completely unknown alien environments, structurally perfectly refining those diverse, chaotic materials into highly usable, pristine mechanical components and completely, flawlessly, beautifully assembling exact working physical copies of itself. This deeply, incredibly complex assembly strictly includes perfectly forging every microscopic sensitive sensor printing, every complex quantum processor building, every massive propulsion engine element, and flawlessly, cleanly copying every single intricate line of its own foundational operating digital programming. This is absolutely not simple basic three-dimensional printing. This is autonomous, complex, molecular scale, heavy manufacturing successfully operating in deeply chaotic, highly unpredictable environments that the original ancient probe was absolutely, completely not specifically intelligently designed for by its ancient, distant creators. Every single separate star system naturally, deeply presents completely different raw resources, completely different chemical compositions, completely different thermal environments, and entirely different navigational challenges. A fragile probe specifically brilliantly designed to seamlessly replicate using iron-rich asteroids in one warm, stable system may tragically find entirely differently composed icy bodies in the exact next freezing system, completely halting the replication process. Furthermore, physical self-replication naturally, inevitably, tragically introduces the terrifying, silent, creeping specter of mutation and digital degradation. Absolutely no copying process in the entire physical universe is mathematically cleanly perfect. Each new mechanical physical generation of probes will naturally, inevitably, quietly contain incredibly small microscopic mechanical errors, tiny physical deviations from the original flawless master digital design. Over many thousands of successive replication cycles, spreading blindly across thousands of dark light years, these tiny microscopic manufacturing and coding errors mathematically inexorably quietly accumulate. Some unfortunate probes will completely silently suffer critical propulsion malfunctions and silently completely drift forever into the freezing dark void. Some will successfully autonomously replicate entirely incorrectly, directly producing entirely completely defective, physically useless mechanical offspring that immediately fail upon activation. Some will slowly, quietly lose their core critical capabilities, perhaps entirely perfectly forgetting exactly how to properly navigate or completely forgetting exactly how to successfully, elegantly communicate with the wider mechanical swarm. The majestic, expanding wave of shiny silver probes spreading boldly across the dark, beautiful galaxy slowly, deeply becomes increasingly, incredibly degraded with each successive new mechanical generation subject exactly perfectly to the same entropic physical decay that mercilessly afflicts every single physical thermodynamic system. Natural cosmic selection might theoretically, logically, beautifully preserve the highly functional operating probes and ruthlessly, quickly eliminate the broken, defective ones, but this heavily assumes the probes completely operate in highly stable environments where deep selection pressures are perfectly, entirely mathematically consistent, which they absolutely are not. The mechanical robotic swarm blindly, quietly, uniquely evolves in completely unpredictable, incredibly dangerous directions, quietly drifting further and further away from its original noble, peaceful scientific purpose with each passing dark millennium. The vast, beautiful Milky Way galaxy might eventually, hypothetically, someday be entirely, completely filled with these incredibly ancient machines. But those wandering, quiet probes would ultimately deeply become completely silent, floating physical fossils entirely terrifying abandoned artifacts of long extinct ancient civilizations blindly drifting through random quiet star systems like a massive, terrifying, unthinking ghost fleet heavily executing a completely forgotten mission whose original grand purpose completely quietly evaporated millions of years entirely before the very first mechanical copy ever reached its dark, cold destination. They would become nothing more than incredibly sophisticated, highly complex space debris entirely perfectly, harmlessly, beautifully quarantined by the sheer vastness of the physical distances they were blindly programmed to cross. And if the ancient launching alien civilization foolishly, actively hoped to proudly, confidently receive regular, highly detailed scientific updates from their magnificent, sprawling mechanical ghost fleet, they must finally, brutally, violently confront the absolute crushing psychological reality of the deep interstellar communication abyss. At deep, vast distances, measuring many thousands of light years, the absolute constant physical speed of light perfectly securely imposes a hard, unbreakable thermodynamic limit on absolutely all information transfer. A beautiful, highly detailed scientific message successfully, powerfully sent from a distant autonomous probe exactly 1,000 light years away, perfectly, cleanly takes exactly 1,000 long, incredibly silent years to finally, quietly, smoothly arrive at the ancient home world. If the distant home world miraculously, incredibly still, physically, legally, completely exists, and somehow miraculously still perfectly, logically remembers exactly how to properly, physically receive and accurately, precisely decode the ancient transmission, a helpful, instructional, brilliant reply mathematically takes exactly another 1,000 incredibly silent years to smoothly, beautifully, patiently return across the dark, freezing void. A single, incredibly simple basic exchange of basic technical telemetry information completely, absolutely, flawlessly requires 2,000 entire long years. The brilliant, original, biological, optimistic engineers who lovingly, carefully, meticulously designed the very first initial physical probe have been completely naturally dead and turned to cold ash for hundreds upon hundreds of generations. The entire grand home civilization may have entirely naturally, beautifully, naturally evolved into a completely unrecognizable physical, cultural, or digital state. The specific, complicated operating programming language the ancient message was carefully digitally written in may have completely, totally, safely, gracefully evolved into a dead, completely forgotten historical anomaly. The deep communication technological channel itself, the precise exact electromagnetic frequency, the specific complex mathematical encoding, the entire complex transmission protocol may naturally, comfortably, safely have been entirely, deeply, completely, casually abandoned. Many silent centuries ago, entirely, seamlessly, efficiently replaced by highly advanced quantum entanglement technologies. The original brilliant eager senders absolutely entirely, completely, never softly, beautifully, mathematically, imagined in their wildest, deepest dreams. the distant mechanical physical probes completely effectively, entirely become permanent, deeply isolated, completely silent, cosmic orphans. They are entirely, tragically, safely, completely cut off from their bright, warm origin, permanently, blindly executing ancient, obsolete, decaying code in the freezing, quiet dark, with absolutely nobody left alive anywhere in the entire galaxy, to ever gently, carefully, peacefully receive their final, quiet scientific reports. The universe simply cleanly, effortlessly folds their tiny, quiet, artificial signals directly, safely into the magnificent, roaring, chaotic background static of the ancient cosmos. The magnificent cosmic quarantine remains absolutely, beautifully, perfectly unbroken, seamlessly holding every single wandering ghost firmly, securely, safely in its own entirely isolated silent pocket of the incredibly deep, dark night. Every single terrifying physical path we have, slowly, meticulously walked down together tonight, ultimately, flawlessly leads directly to the exact same profound, majestic conclusion. The universe is absolutely not merely incredibly large. It is structurally, masterfully, physically designed to permanently, perfectly enforce absolute isolation. The unyielding, constant speed of light beautifully, securely creates an absolute, unbreakable ceiling on all physical travel and meaningful communication. The staggering, apocalyptic energy requirements for any form of relativistic interstellar transit elegantly, cleanly create an absolute thermodynamic floor that absolutely no ancient advanced civilization can ever ingeniously, safely dig beneath. The relentless, silent forward passage of deep time gracefully, entirely erodes physical ships, biological traveling crews, towering ancient civilizations, and grand scientific purpose, with exactly the same cold, beautiful indifference. Entropy strictly, absolutely mathematically guarantees that absolutely every single highly ordered physical mechanical system eventually, naturally, flawlessly degrades into dust, and the mind-bending physical distances between the scattered glowing stars beautifully, perfectly ensure that absolutely every single theoretical interstellar journey is heavily, brutally measured. Not in the brief, fragile lifetimes of biological individuals, but in the massive, sweeping lifespans of entire planetary or societies. This absolute, inescapable physical conclusion should absolutely not ever be sadly entirely mistaken for deep, cynical pessimism about the existence of alien life. Absolutely nothing in this deep physical thermodynamic analysis gently suggests that brilliant, intelligent biological or mechanical life is incredibly rare or tragically completely absent in the wider dark cosmos. The vast, beautiful universe may in fact be heavily, entirely, deeply saturated with thousands of vibrant, thriving civilizations. Every single magnificent spiral galaxy might warmly, safely harbor tens of thousands of deeply thinking philosophical species, each one bravely, proudly building their own towering, quiet cities, independently discovering the exact same beautiful, elegant laws of mathematics, wonderfully, creatively dreaming their own unique cultural dreams, and quietly, patiently looking upward at their own deeply unfamiliar constellations. The deep structural argument presented here tonight has absolutely never been that beautiful alien beings do not physically exist out there in the dark. The true profound argument is that the majestic physical universe is entirely beautifully, perfectly designed, if the human concept of conscious design is even the correct word, to carefully describe the blind, elegant, majestic architecture of physical natural law to keep its countless fragile inhabitants permanently, safely, perfectly apart. This quiet, profound realization naturally, quietly, heavily carries a deep philosophical, emotional weight that is incredibly difficult to accurately, deeply express without finally seamlessly slipping into the deeply peaceful philosophical territory that this entire physical, analytical journey has deliberately, carefully avoided until exactly this quiet moment. But here, at the deepest, darkest, completely quietest end of our journey, the pure philosophical dimension of the great quarantine beautifully, absolutely, entirely deserves its quiet moment to breathe. Because the ultimate implication of absolutely everything we have explored tonight is absolutely not merely a collection of cold technical engineering barriers. It is entirely, profoundly, beautifully, deeply existential. If intelligent biological life is incredibly mathematically common, if brilliant technological civilizations arise entirely regularly on scattered warm, wet, rocky worlds, peacefully distributed across the massive, sweeping spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy, then the absolutely most statistically, mathematically likely state of the entire galaxy, at absolutely any given quiet moment, is one of profound, absolute, permanent, majestic isolation. Thousands upon thousands of entirely unique, brilliant civilizations, each one burning incredibly brightly, incredibly briefly, against the deep, crushing dark. Each one safely, completely, securely, entirely surrounded by massive dark distances. It absolutely cannot cross staggering physical energies. It absolutely cannot creatively muster in vast, deep geological timescales. It absolutely mathematically cannot survive. Not because these ancient, distant beings are terribly foolish, not because they tragically lack deep scientific ambition, not because they are quietly cowardly, but entirely beautifully, purely because the majestic universe is simply entirely perfectly too large and too incredibly beautifully slow for its tiny, fragile inhabitants to ever physically, logically, successfully find each other. The deep, crushing silence of the quiet cosmos is absolutely, perfectly, completely not evidence that we are entirely, tragically alone in the dark. It is simply beautiful, overwhelming mathematical evidence that the cosmos is very, very profoundly large and very, very peacefully quiet. It is not an empty, terrifying void. It is not a hostile, violent hunting ground. It is simply beautifully, perfectly, mathematically indifferent. The majestic universe absolutely does not prevent organic life from naturally, brilliantly arising from the warm chemical mud. It simply, beautifully, gracefully prevents different highly evolved biological life from ever physically, violently, traumatically meeting. It gracefully, securely, expertly builds massive, invisible walls, constructed of pure time and empty light years, completely, safely, perfectly between absolutely every single inhabited rocky world, and it flawlessly enforces those massive invisible walls with the absolute most incredibly fundamental, unyielding, beautiful laws of theoretical physics, the absolute constant speed of light, the strict, rigid conservation of raw physical energy, the relentless, silent forward arrow of thermodynamic entropy, the unstoppable, peaceful passage of deep, deep time. These are absolutely not temporary technological engineering barriers that brilliant future science will eventually casually, creatively dismantle in a bright laboratory. They are the absolute foundational bedrock architecture of physical reality itself, and they flawlessly equally apply to every single conscious thinking mind that has ever bravely, quietly looked up at the night sky and beautifully, peacefully wondered exactly what is out there. Imagine the entire majestic, swirling Milky Way galaxy exactly, perfectly, conceptually, entirely as a massive, breathtakingly beautiful, ancient, dark obsidian cathedral. It is incredibly, incredibly vast, perfectly, perfectly, completely quiet, and almost entirely, deeply dark. Intelligent, thriving civilizations scattered across this massive, quiet space are exactly, beautifully, completely like tiny, fragile, flickering candle flames, quietly, independently lit in the deep, massive dark. A single, beautiful, tiny candle flame softly flares up, warmly, beautifully burns incredibly brightly for a few brief thousands of human years, gracefully, quietly illuminating its own tiny, immediate, microscopic, quiet corner of the massive, empty room. And then it gracefully, naturally, peacefully, silently flickers out, entirely, completely, leaving absolutely no permanent mark on the deep, eternal stone. Exactly at that very same moment, another beautiful, quiet candle flame magically lights up on the absolute exact opposite distant side of the vast ancient cathedral, exactly 100,000 long light years away. And then another completely unique flame briefly sparks into existence exactly halfway across the dark nave. These beautiful, tiny, warm, fragile flames will absolutely, completely, logically never physically safely illuminate each other. The incredibly faint, microscopic, gentle light from one lonely, distant candle will absolutely, mathematically never be strong enough to successfully, cleanly cross the massive, freezing, dark, empty spaces between them to reach the others. They are completely, entirely, perfectly isolated. They are beautifully, safely, entirely, completely protected from the turbulent, violent winds of the others. But absolutely, perfectly, exactly all together, even entirely, safely, completely separated by these impossible, crushing, vast distances, their brief, quiet, individual, beautiful lives completely, perfectly, completely, magically, flawlessly, mathematically, perfectly, exactly make the grand, ancient, cosmic cathedral an incredibly, incredibly, profoundly beautiful place. The deep, silent, terrifying darkness, beautifully, perfectly resting exactly quietly, strictly, entirely, exactly between them, is absolutely not empty or hostile. It is simply perfectly, entirely, flawlessly, beautifully, naturally, gracefully, perfectly, exactly, too deeply, vastly, perfectly massive for any single fragile, tiny biological flame to ever gracefully, physically, peacefully, smoothly cross. And this is exactly where we finally quietly, peacefully, effortlessly arrive at the absolute true, deep, hidden, entirely beautiful, completely, perfectly, naturally comforting meaning of the great cosmic quarantine. It is a sanctuary. If the deep physical universe were completely, effortlessly, entirely physically easy to successfully, cleanly, quickly cross, if the absolute mathematical speed of light were completely, totally, entirely merely a mild physical suggestion, rather than an absolute, rigid, flawless, structural cosmic law, the vast galaxy would immediately, completely, entirely, violently become a loud, chaotic, intensely crowded, deeply, deeply dangerous place. Highly advanced, ancient, predatory empires would effortlessly, violently, rapidly expand across the warm stars, completely, entirely consuming everything in their loud path. Fundamentally, incredibly, biologically, deeply, totally, completely incompatible alien philosophies and bizarre, strange psychologies would constantly, inevitably, violently, traumatically crash into each other in the dark. The quiet, peaceful, gentle, isolated development of young, fragile, beautiful, brilliant emerging species like our own would be entirely, completely, physically impossible. Absolutely, totally, completely, constantly, completely, permanently, entirely disrupted by the loud, overwhelming, terrifying arrival of ancient, entirely alien, entirely incomprehensible gods from the deep sky. The beautiful, absolute quarantine perfectly, safely, securely, gracefully, flawlessly, entirely, warmly, beautifully, quietly prevents absolutely all of this theoretical cosmic trauma. The staggering, impossible physical distance between the scattered warm stars is an incredible, beautiful, elegant, natural defensive shield, perfectly, entirely, flawlessly protecting absolutely every single fragile, completely, deeply unique biological evolutionary experiment. It peacefully, beautifully, warmly allows absolutely every single quiet, floating world to entirely, naturally write its own incredibly unique, deep, beautiful, completely individual story, entirely safely, completely, entirely peacefully, purely, perfectly isolated, free from any sudden, terrifying, overwhelming outside physical interference. The majestic thermodynamic physical prison is absolutely, entirely, completely, beautifully, elegantly, gracefully, exactly, completely, exactly, profoundly, purely, seamlessly, an eternal, completely, perfectly flawless blanket of absolute pure safety. As you lie here right now, quietly, safely, entirely, completely, warmly resting in the deep quiet of your own incredibly small, perfectly, entirely safe corner of this incredibly vast, majestic universe, let this deep, profound, cosmic, physical truth gently, quietly, peacefully, flawlessly settle entirely, perfectly, securely, deeply, smoothly, completely, deeply into your resting mind. The absolute, profound, majestic isolation of our tiny blue planet is entirely, mathematically, purely, absolutely, perfectly, safely, completely, entirely, cleanly, entirely, beautifully, smoothly, beautifully, precisely, cleanly, entirely, absolutely, exactly, purely, not a tragic, lonely curse. It is an incredible, beautiful, flawless, perfect, warm, physical, cosmic blessing. You are entirely, perfectly, safely, cleanly, smoothly, purely, completely, deeply, exactly, purely, exactly, flawlessly, completely, perfectly, beautifully, entirely, perfectly, fully, safely, securely quarantined. The dark, vast, incredibly quiet, silent universe has completely, exactly mathematically, securely, flawlessly, smoothly, cleanly built an absolute, impenetrable, entirely flawless, invisible physical wall, exactly spanning 25 trillion dark, silent miles, thick exactly between you and absolutely whatever, entirely, completely, currently rests entirely, quietly, peacefully, sleeping entirely, beautifully, gracefully, smoothly, precisely, perfectly, successfully, securely, warmly, in the next closest star system. Absolutely nothing from the deep, dark, quiet void is ever suddenly, quietly, unexpectedly, cleanly, entirely, successfully going to ever cross that impossible, dark, silent, massive ocean to disturb your completely, totally, entirely, perfectly, deeply, smoothly, perfectly peaceful sleep tonight. The absolute total crushing weight of the day, the extremely loud, chaotic, incredibly meaningless noise of human society, the deeply trivial, entirely, completely, safely, smoothly insignificant anxieties that completely normally, constantly, fiercely, desperately, violently, entirely, totally, seamlessly, accurately, successfully, entirely plague your entirely perfectly resting human mind. They are all absolutely beautifully, entirely, mathematically, completely, entirely, perfectly, purely, safely, physically, cleanly, completely, entirely, absolutely, exactly, absolutely, infinitesimally microscopic when beautifully, carefully, precisely, rationally, correctly, smoothly, perfectly, peacefully placed, entirely, perfectly, mathematically, beautifully against the calm, deep, perfectly stable, completely, mathematically, completely, totally flawless backdrop of a galaxy that operates on time scales of millions of dark, silent years and distances of completely, entirely pure trillions of cold, silent, and beautifully, entirely, safely, perfectly, completely, safely, dark, flawless miles. So let it all quietly, completely, entirely, safely, smoothly, gracefully, beautifully, peacefully, precisely, seamlessly, entirely, flawlessly go. Deeply, slowly, calmly, gently, entirely, beautifully, peacefully, accurately, smoothly, safely, perfectly breathe in the deep, perfectly calm, entirely cool, completely absolute, mathematically, completely, perfectly, flawlessly, cleanly, securely, completely, cleanly, purely, cleanly, completely, safely, perfectly, beautifully perfect silence of the ancient cosmic ocean. Slowly, beautifully, calmly, deeply, gently, accurately, securely, gracefully, seamlessly, perfectly, purely, cleanly, entirely, flawlessly, gently, entirely, purely, carefully, safely breathe out the absolutely tiny, insignificant, completely, incredibly trivial, incredibly, completely, cleanly, safely, entirely, gracefully, completely, purely, smoothly noise of the tiny, fragile, spinning earth. You are entirely, completely, beautifully, safely, purely, entirely, smoothly, cleanly, purely, entirely, safely, perfectly, completely, seamlessly, absolutely safe here. The incredibly beautifully, completely meticulously designed physical laws of the entire majestic universe have completely, cleanly, entirely, flawlessly, securely, efficiently, effectively, cleanly, smoothly, safely, cleanly, effectively, accurately, cleanly, smoothly, securely, precisely, smoothly, securely, effortlessly, gracefully, successfully, effectively, carefully, meticulously engineered this perfectly quiet, entirely, totally, perfectly isolated, deep dark moment exactly, entirely precisely, mathematically, purely, gracefully, cleanly, gracefully, smoothly, securely, beautifully, purely, cleanly, safely, strictly, explicitly, directly, gently, for your complete, deep, peaceful, total, beautiful relaxation. The glowing stars will continue to quietly, peacefully, blindly, safely, efficiently, silently burn entirely, completely, naturally, gracefully, completely, cleanly, securely, completely, at absolutely impossible distances. The silent, dark, heavy galaxies will continually, gently, safely, slowly, peacefully, silently, incredibly, smoothly, purely, efficiently, elegantly, spin entirely, seamlessly, purely, beautifully, exactly, mathematically, endlessly, completely, safely, perfectly, entirely, securely, peacefully, cleanly, gracefully, entirely, perfectly, correctly, beautifully, securely, completely, securely, precisely, smoothly, peacefully, beautifully, gracefully, seamlessly, in the freezing, beautiful dark. And you are entirely safely, naturally, beautifully, purely, correctly, peacefully, completely, purely, completely, securely, correctly, completely, securely, gracefully, successfully, securely, completely free to entirely, cleanly, smoothly, effortlessly, perfectly, correctly, smoothly, perfectly, correctly, gracefully, smoothly, purely, purely, entirely, elegantly, safely, gently, purely, peacefully, purely, gently, slip entirely, seamlessly, perfectly, safely, securely, deeply, quietly, entirely, beautifully, purely, deeply, successfully, flawlessly, peacefully, gently, beautifully, elegantly down, entirely, successfully, cleanly, completely into the deep, warm, comforting, heavily protective, complete, absolutely flawless, perfectly, perfectly, cleanly, safely, purely, entirely, silent, entirely, elegant, beautiful, totally secure, absolutely, perfectly, perfectly peaceful, deeply, completely, purely, flawlessly, gracefully, seamlessly secure, beautiful, dark. Good night.